My wife said, I invited my ex-lover to our family vacation. If you loved me, you'd understand. I replied, I do understand. Then I quietly contacted his wife and invited her as my plus one. The trip became legendary when, look, I'm not saying I'm the world's greatest husband, but I'm pretty sure I rank somewhere above guy who forgets anniversaries and well below Instagram influencer who posts cringe couples content every morning. I do the dishes most nights. I remember to buy the fancy coffee creamer Lila likes. And I've never once complained about her obsession with throw pillows that serve absolutely no functional purpose except making our couch look like a Bed Bath and Beyond exploded. So when we sat down for our Tuesday night spaghetti dinner, the one sacred tradition in our chaotic household where we actually pretend to be a functional family unit, I figured we'd talk about normal stuff like whose turn it was to take out the recycling or whether our oldest kid needed braces yet. The kids were doing their usual dinner theater performance, fighting over who got the garlic bread in pieces like it was the last helicopter out of a zombie apocalypse-geddon, and my mother-in-law was giving me that look she always gives me, the one that says she's still not entirely convinced I'm good enough for her daughter. Classic Tuesday evening, right? Lila had this weird energy, though, like she'd been holding on to something all day and was just waiting for the right moment to unleash it. I should have known something was up when she poured herself a second glass of wine before we'd even finished the salad course. That's never a good sign. That's the international signal for buckle up, buttercup, because things are about to get weird. So there we were, me twirling spaghetti onto my fork like a civilized human being, thinking about how nice it would be to finally use that beach house we'd been planning to visit for months. The kids were pumped, talking about building sandcastles and finding seashells and all that wholesome stuff that makes you forget they spent the morning screaming at each other over the TV remote. Even my in-laws seemed excited, which was saying something because my father-in-law's idea of a good time usually involves complaining about gas prices and falling asleep in front of Fox News. I was mentally planning my vacation strategy, hammock time, maybe some fishing, definitely avoiding any deep conversations about feelings or the future or whatever emotional landmines Lila's mom would inevitably try to discuss after her third margarita. That's when Lila dropped the atomic bomb right into my marinara sauce. So, I invited Adrian to come with us on the vacation, she said, all casual, like she was mentioning she'd picked up milk at the store. If you really loved me, you'd understand why this is important. I'm not exaggerating when I say I nearly performed an involuntary spaghetti inhalation that would have required the Heimlich maneuver and possibly a mortifying obituary that read, local man dies choking on pasta after wife invites ex-boyfriend on family vacation. The noodles went down wrong. The sauce felt like it was burning a hole through my esophagus, and for a solid 3 seconds I couldn't breathe, speak, or process what the hell had just happened. My brain basically blue-screened like a Windows 95 computer trying to run modern software. Adrian. Her ex-boyfriend Adrian. The guy she dated in college, the one she swore was just a friend now and totally over, and not even someone I think about anymore. That Adrian. Coming on our family vacation. To the beach house, where we'd all be trapped together for 7 days in close quarters, sharing bathrooms and meal times, and probably some deeply uncomfortable moments around the bonfire. The kids didn't even notice. They were too busy arguing about whether dolphins or sharks were cooler. My mother-in-law raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The woman could communicate entire dissertations with that eyebrow, and right now it was saying, I told you this marriage was a mistake. My father-in-law just kept eating, either completely oblivious or practicing the advanced survival technique of pretending nothing weird was happening. I could have gone full nuclear right there. I could have slammed my fork down, demanded explanations, asked what kind of parallel universe logic made her think this was even remotely appropriate. But here's the thing about being married for several years and developing what I like to call advanced conflict avoidance skills. You learn to play the long game. You learn that sometimes the best response isn't the immediate explosion, but the calculated, strategic maneuver that comes later when your opponent least expects it. So I smiled. I actually smiled, took a sip of water to clear the pasta debris from my windpipe, and said in the calmest voice I could muster, You know what, honey? I totally understand. The look of relief on her face was almost comical. She actually thought I was cool with this. She thought I was some enlightened, evolved husband who didn't mind his wife's ex-boyfriend tagging along on family vacation like some kind of bizarre romantic throuple situation. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes getting all misty like I'd just agreed to donate a kidney or something equally selfless. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you'd get it. Adrian's going through a rough time, and his wife Clara is overseas for work, so he'd be alone, and I just thought." "It's totally fine," I interrupted, still smiling like a deranged game show host. Family vacation should be about including people who matter. What I didn't tell her, what I kept locked behind my teeth and my increasingly fake smile, was that my version of understanding involved immediate action. The kind of action that would make this vacation absolutely legendary for all the wrong reasons. Because while she was sitting there feeling grateful and validated, my brain was already 3 steps ahead, calculating, planning, preparing for what I like to call Operation Beach House Karma. Inside my head, my internal monologue was having an absolute field day. "Oh sure, honey, nothing screams romantic family bonding like me building sandcastles with our kids while your ex-boyfriend flexes his probably still decent abs and reminisces about your college makeout sessions. Totally normal. Completely healthy. This is definitely what therapists recommend for strong marriages. Maybe we should invite all our exes. We could make it a whole reunion tour. I could bring that girl from sophomore year who dumped me at prom. You could invite every guy you ever dated. And we could all just have one big happy festival of unresolved emotional baggage and questionable boundary issues." But externally, I just kept smiling and eating my spaghetti like nothing in the world was wrong. "When does Adrian arrive?" I asked, all innocent curiosity. "He'll meet us at the beach house on the first day," Lila said, practically glowing with appreciation for my apparently boundless understanding and maturity. "Perfect," I said. "That gives me plenty of time to make sure everything's ready." And boy, was I going to make sure everything was ready. Because if Lila wanted to play games with our family vacation, if she wanted to test my loyalty or relive her glory days, or whatever twisted logic was driving this train wreck of an idea, then I was going to make absolutely certain this became a vacation none of us would ever forget. I finished my spaghetti, helped clear the table, kissed Lila goodnight like nothing had changed, and went straight to my laptop. Time to do some research. Time to find out everything about Adrian's life, his social media, his current situation, and most importantly, time to track down his wife Clara, who apparently was overseas for work and had no idea her husband was about to spend a week at the beach with his ex-girlfriend. This vacation was going to be legendary, all right. Just not the way Lila was expecting. So here's the thing about playing it cool in a crisis. It requires the acting skills of an Oscar-winning performer and the poker face of a professional gambler who just got dealt a royal flush. After dinner, I went through all the motions of normal husband mode. Helped load the dishwasher, asked Lila about her day like I actually cared about Karen from accounting's drama. Kissed her goodnight with just enough affection to seem genuine, but not so much that it would be suspicious. Then I casually mentioned I had some work emails to catch up on and retreated to my home office like a man on a mission, because that's exactly what I was. The second that door clicked shut behind me, I transformed from clueless husband into detective extraordinaire. I fired up my laptop with the kind of intensity usually reserved for hackers and movie montages, except instead of breaking into government databases, I was doing something far more powerful in the modern age. I was diving into the bottomless pit of social media stalking. And let me tell you, Facebook is basically a private investigator's dream come true. Except it's free and you don't have to sit in a car eating cold sandwiches while taking surveillance photos. Finding Adrian took me approximately 30 seconds, which is about how long it takes to type Adrian plus Lila's maiden name into the search bar. Boom. There he was, profile picture and all, looking exactly like the kind of guy who would think it's appropriate to crash a family vacation with his ex-girlfriend. He had that whole, "I peaked in college and I'm desperately trying to maintain relevance" vibe going on. Polo shirts, boat shoes in every photo, suspiciously well-maintained hair for a guy pushing 40. His About section said he worked in finance, which could mean anything from actual Wall Street wizard to sells insurance out of a strip mall office, but I wasn't here to judge his career choices. I was here for intel. I clicked through to his friends list with the systematic precision of a researcher looking for a cure to cancer, except my cure involved exposing whatever shady situation Lila had gotten us into. And that's when I struck gold, silver, and probably platinum all at once. Adrian's wife. Her name was right there, tagged in approximately 7 million photos. Clara Mitchell. Not whatever fake name Lila had mumbled at dinner when she mentioned his wife, who's overseas. In fact, I was pretty sure Lila had said something like Christine or Christina or some other generic name she'd probably invented on the spot while concocting this whole disastrous plan. I clicked on Clara's profile, and holy hell, this woman was not overseas. Unless overseas meant the local CrossFit gym 3 miles from here, because her most recent post from literally this morning showed her deadlifting what looked like my entire body weight, tagged at Iron Paradise Fitness Center, with a location pin that definitely indicated she was very much on American soil. Her profile was public. Thank you. People who don't understand privacy settings. And I could see everything. Daily workout posts, pictures of her at her law firm's office. She was a paralegal, not exactly a struggling professional who needed to take overseas assignments. And most tellingly, absolutely zero indication that she was planning any kind of international travel. So Lila had lied. Straight up, bold-faced, looked me in the eye, and fed me a complete fabrication about Clara being overseas. Which meant this whole situation was even sketchier than I'd initially thought, and my initial thoughts were already pretty damn sketchy. This wasn't just inviting an old friend to vacation because he's lonely. This was premeditated deception with layers, like some kind of betrayal lasagna. I was mentally preparing my confrontation speech, practicing my "how could you" face in the reflection of my computer screen, when I noticed something even better sitting on the kitchen counter through my office door. Lila's iPad, just sitting there, charging, completely unattended, probably still unlocked because she never remembers to set a timeout on that thing. Now, I know what you're thinking. Invading someone's privacy is wrong. It's a violation of trust. It's the kind of thing that gets you labeled as controlling or toxic in relationship advice columns written by people who've clearly never had their spouse invite an ex to family vacation. But here's my counterargument. She invited her ex-boyfriend to our family vacation and lied about his wife's whereabouts. At that point, the social contract of respecting privacy had been shredded, burned, and scattered to the winds like ashes of trust. I wasn't being paranoid or controlling. I was being a detective working with probable cause. If this were a legal case, I'd have enough justification for a warrant. So I quietly walked out to the kitchen, picked up that iPad like it was the Holy Grail, and carried it back to my office. It was still unlocked. Of course it was. And her Messages app was right there, icon sitting on the home screen, practically begging me to click it. So I did. And what I found made my previous spaghetti choking incident look like a mild cough. Messages between Lila and Adrian going back weeks. Not just casual, "hey, how are you" stuff either. I'm talking full-blown flirty conversations that made me want to sanitize my eyeballs with bleach. Remember when we used to stay up all night talking? And I still think about that weekend at the cabin, and other vague references to their past relationship that had absolutely no business being discussed between a married woman and her ex-boyfriend. The kind of messages that live in that gray area where nothing explicitly inappropriate is said, but the vibe is so obvious that even a marriage counselor would take one look and go, yeah, that's not okay. But it got worse. So much worse. Because scattered throughout these nostalgic trip down memory lane messages were recent photos. Adrian sending Lila pictures of himself at the gym with captions like, "getting ready for beach season," and "still got it," with those absolutely insufferable flexing emojis. And these weren't just casual selfies either. These were the kind of shirtless, carefully angled, specifically lit photos that guys only send to women they're trying to impress. The kind of photos that scream, "please tell me I'm still attractive," and "remember when you used to be into this?" I sat there staring at a picture of Adrian's abs, which, I'll grudgingly admit, were annoyingly well-defined for a guy his age, and felt a whole spectrum of emotions cycle through my brain. First was rage, obviously, the kind of white-hot anger that makes you want to throw expensive electronics across the room. Then came disbelief, because surely my wife wasn't actually this blatant about whatever was going on here. Then came a sort of sad resignation, the realization that I'd been completely oblivious while this whole thing developed under my nose. And finally, crystallizing into sharp focus, came determination. Because here's the thing, I hadn't even achieved my dad bod goals yet. I was still in that awkward phase between actively trying to stay in shape and giving up and embracing elastic waistbands. I'd been working on developing a respectable beer belly and perfecting my grill dad aesthetic. And here was Adrian sending progress pics like he was training for the Olympics of being an inappropriate ex-boyfriend. The audacity alone was staggering. I scrolled further, taking mental notes, screenshotting a few particularly damning exchanges for potential future evidence. There were late-night conversations, the timestamps showing messages sent at 1, 2, sometimes 3 in the morning. What were they talking about at 3 a.m. that couldn't wait until morning? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't discussing tax strategies or sharing recipes. These were the kind of conversations that happen when boundaries have not just been crossed, but have been demolished and paved over with a highway of inappropriate behavior. And through all of this, through every flirty message and shirtless photo and late-night conversation, I kept coming back to one central question. What the hell was Lila thinking? Did she really believe I wouldn't find out? Did she think I'd just smile and nod while her ex-boyfriend paraded around our family vacation like some kind of romantic rival in a bad rom-com? Did she honestly expect me to build sandcastles with our kids while Adrian flexed nearby and they exchanged knowing glances? I put the iPad back exactly where I'd found it, returned to my office, and pulled up Clara's Facebook profile again. This time, I wasn't just looking for information, I was looking for an ally. Because if Lila wanted to play games with our marriage and our family vacation, then I was going to change the rules of the game entirely. I was going to do something so perfectly, beautifully justified that even the most cynical observer would have to admit I was completely in the right. I was going to invite Clara to join us on vacation, and I was going to make sure she knew exactly why she needed to be there. Crafting the perfect message to a complete stranger about how their spouse is potentially cheating with your wife requires a delicate balance of diplomacy, evidence, and just enough passive-aggressive politeness to avoid sounding like a lunatic. I sat there staring at the Facebook Messenger screen for a solid 10 minutes, typing and deleting, rewriting and reconsidering, trying to find the exact tone that said, "I'm a reasonable person dealing with an unreasonable situation," rather than, "I'm a jealous husband who's completely lost his mind." Because let's be real, cold messaging someone to inform them their marriage might be a dumpster fire is not exactly covered in standard etiquette guides. I mean, what's the protocol here? Do I lead with sympathy? Do I go full factual and clinical? Do I include screenshots right away or build up to it like some kind of dramatic revelation? There's no Hallmark card for, "Hi, our spouses are acting shady together, and I thought you should know." I couldn't exactly open with, "Hey girl, your husband's been sending thirst traps to my wife," because that sounded insane even though it was technically accurate. I needed to sound credible, concerned, and most importantly, not like some conspiracy theorist who'd gone off the deep end after too much caffeine and paranoia. After what felt like 17 drafts, I finally settled on something that threaded the needle between polite and pointed. I took a deep breath, said a little prayer to the gods of justified pettiness, and hit send on a message that would either make me look like a hero or a complete psychopath, depending on how Clara decided to interpret it. "Hi Clara, I know this is extremely unusual, and we've never met, but I'm Lila's husband. My wife mentioned that Adrian would be joining us for our family beach vacation next week, and she told me you couldn't make it because you're overseas for work. I wanted to personally extend an invitation to you as my guest. After all, it's a family vacation, and it wouldn't be right to exclude you. I'm sure it'll be fun. Adrian will be there, and I'd love for you to join us." I read it over about 40 times, analyzing every word choice like I was defending a thesis. The tone was friendly, but with just enough subtext to make it clear something was off. The mention of her being overseas, when her Facebook clearly showed she was local. That was the hook. The personal invitation phrasing made it sound generous, while actually being a giant flashing warning sign. And that final line, "Adrian will be there, and I'd love for you to join us," was chef's kiss level passive-aggressive perfection. It was the written equivalent of handing someone a shovel and pointing at the grave their spouse had been digging. I hit send before I could second-guess myself again, then immediately felt that rush of adrenaline mixed with mild terror that comes from doing something you can't take back. The message was out there in the digital universe, traveling through cyberspace to land in the inbox of a woman who was about to have her entire week, possibly her entire marriage, completely upended. For a moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Maybe I should have just confronted Lila directly. Maybe I should have been the bigger person and had an adult conversation about boundaries and trust and all that therapy speak nonsense that never actually solves anything. But then I remembered those 3 a.m. text messages. I remembered Adrian's gym selfies and Lila's flirty responses. I remembered the way she'd looked me in the eye at dinner and fed me that story about Clara being overseas like I was too stupid to verify basic facts. And my moment of doubt evaporated like morning fog under desert sun. I sat there refreshing my messages every 30 seconds like some kind of obsessive teenager waiting for their crush to text back. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started wondering if maybe Clara didn't check her Facebook regularly, or if my message had gone to her spam folder, or if the universe was just going to leave me hanging in this weird limbo of uncertainty. I got up to grab a beer from the fridge, telling myself I'd check one more time, and then go to bed and deal with whatever response came tomorrow. But when I came back to my laptop, there it was. A new message notification. From Clara. Sent literally 2 minutes after I'd walked away, because of course the universe has that kind of timing. My heart did this weird lurching thing that I'm pretty sure isn't medically advisable, and I clicked on the message with the kind of nervous anticipation usually reserved for opening college acceptance letters or COVID test results. Overseas? That's interesting news to me. I'm actually at my office right now, finishing up some case files. Adrian told me he had a mandatory work conference next week and wouldn't be available. He seemed pretty adamant about it. Actually, said it was important for a potential promotion. I'll happily attend your vacation. Thank you so much for letting me know about this situation. I think we should talk. I literally had to read it 3 times because my brain couldn't quite process the beautiful, terrible perfection of what had just happened. Adrian had lied to Clara about where he was going. Lila had lied to me about where Clara was. These 2 absolute geniuses had constructed overlapping lies that were now colliding like matter and antimatter, and I was sitting front row with popcorn watching the explosion happen in slow motion. Clara wasn't just suspicious, she was ready for action. That, "I'll happily attend," wasn't the response of someone who thought this might be a misunderstanding. That was the response of someone who'd just been handed evidence of betrayal and was ready to burn everything down with righteous fury. And that final line, "I think we should talk," sent a little shiver down my spine because it meant this wasn't just about showing up at the vacation. This was about strategy. This was about coordination. This was about 2 people who'd been wrong deciding to join forces like some kind of revenge superhero team-up. I typed back quickly, riding the wave of vindictive satisfaction that was currently flooding my entire nervous system. "I think that's a great idea. Maybe we should compare notes before the trip. I have a feeling there's more going on here than either of us initially realized. Are you free to meet for coffee this week?" Her response came back almost immediately. "Tomorrow morning? There's a Starbucks on 5th Street. I can do 8 a.m. before work. And just so you know, I'm a lawyer. Well, paralegal, but I work for one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. If this is what I think it is, I know exactly how to handle it." I actually laughed out loud at that, a sharp bark of surprised delight that probably would have woken Lila if she wasn't already asleep down the hall. Of course Clara worked for a divorce attorney. Of course the universe had handed me an ally who came pre-equipped with legal knowledge and professional connections to relationship destruction. This wasn't just karma. This was karma with a law degree and a grudge. Perfect. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. And Clara, thank you for being reasonable about this. I know it's a weird situation. I typed it out, trying to sound normal and grateful rather than gleefully vengeful. Trust me, if anyone should be thanking anyone, it's me thanking you. I've suspected something was off for weeks now. Adrian's been distracted, secretive, always on his phone. I just couldn't prove anything. You might have just handed me everything I needed. See you tomorrow. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, letting the full weight of what I'd just set in motion wash over me. In less than an hour, I'd gone from betrayed husband to strategic mastermind. I'd found Clara, contacted her, confirmed that Adrian was lying to her too, and recruited her as an ally for what was shaping up to be the most dramatic family vacation in the history of family vacations. This wasn't just going to be a beach trip anymore. This was going to be a reckoning. This was going to be the kind of confrontation that people would talk about for years, the story that would get retold at family gatherings with increasingly dramatic embellishments. I thought about Lila sleeping peacefully down the hall, probably dreaming about her romantic beach reunion with Adrian, completely unaware that I'd just detonated a bomb under her entire plan. Part of me felt guilty, a very small part, like maybe 2% of my conscience. The rest of me felt something else entirely. Justified, vindicated, and honestly, kind of excited. Because this vacation was going to be absolutely legendary, just not in the way anyone except me and Clara were expecting. I finished my beer, turned off the lights, and headed to bed. Tomorrow I'd meet Clara, and we'd plan our strategy. But tonight, I was going to sleep better than I had in days, secure in the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe rewards the wronged party with the perfect opportunity for poetic justice. And I was going to make absolutely sure we didn't waste it. The days leading up to the vacation were like watching a train wreck happen in slow motion. Except I was the one who'd carefully placed the explosives on the tracks and was now sitting back with a detailed schedule of exactly when everything would blow up. Lila was in full vacation planning mode, which meant our house had transformed into what looked like a REI store exploded inside a Pinterest board. There were color-coded packing lists taped to the fridge, spreadsheets detailing meal plans, and about 17 different types of sunscreen lined up on the counter because apparently SPF 50 and SPF 45 serve completely different purposes that I was too male to understand. She kept talking about the trip with this excited energy that would have been adorable if it wasn't completely based on a foundation of lies and terrible decision-making. I think we should do a bonfire on the first night, she'd say, arranging beach towels by size. And maybe we can have a big family dinner on the deck the second evening. Every conversation was peppered with casual mentions of Adrian, like she was trying to normalize his presence before we even got there. Adrian loves seafood, so maybe we should plan a shrimp boil. Or Adrian mentioned he bought a new paddleboard, so that'll be fun to try out. I just nodded along like a bobblehead, smiling and agreeing while internally cataloging every mention for future reference. The seating arrangements conversation was where I really got to flex my newfound talent for weaponized agreeability. We were sitting at the kitchen table with her hand-drawn diagram of the beach house layout, and she was moving little pieces of paper around like we were planning a military operation instead of a family vacation. I was thinking Adrian could sit here at dinner, she said, pointing to a spot directly across from her and suspiciously close to where I'd normally sit. That way he's not isolated at the end of the table with just the kids. I looked at her seating chart, then looked at her, then delivered my line with the straightest face I could manage. You know what? Why don't we seat him with the kids? They could probably use a babysitter during meals anyway. Give us adults some time to actually have conversations. The emphasis on us adults was subtle but deliberate, and I watched her face do this weird micro-expression thing where she couldn't quite decide if I was being helpful or sarcastic. She didn't laugh, but I did, internally, where all my best comedy was currently happening. That's not really what I had in mind, she said, moving the Adrian paper piece back to her preferred location. I think it's important we include him in the adult conversations. He's going through a hard time. Right, because his wife is overseas, I said, loading that sentence with just enough emphasis that a smarter person would have caught on. But Lila was too focused on her vacation fantasy to notice the sarcasm dripping from every word. She just nodded enthusiastically and went back to planning where everyone would sit, stand, sleep, and apparently exist in her carefully orchestrated week of beach house drama. Meanwhile, Clara and I had become what I can only describe as co-conspirators in the most justified revenge plot ever conceived. After our initial coffee meeting, where she'd shown up with an actual notebook and had taken notes like we were planning a legal case, which I guess we kind of were, we'd been trading updates almost daily. She dug into Adrian's phone records through some legal magic I didn't quite understand and didn't want to know too much about, confirming that yes, he'd been texting Lila at all hours. I'd provided screenshots of the flirty messages and shirtless gym photos, which Clara had looked at with the cold, analytical stare of someone deciding exactly how much alimony to request. So he told me this conference was mandatory for his career advancement, Clara had said during one of our planning sessions, her voice dripping with the kind of bitter sarcasm that only comes from being lied to by someone you trusted. He even showed me the fake confirmation email, printed it out, put it on the fridge like he was proud of his attention to detail. She'd laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that had sharp edges. Meanwhile, he's been buying new swim trunks and doing extra gym sessions. For a work conference. Right. We'd worked out the logistics of her arrival like we were planning a surprise party, except instead of cake and balloons, we were delivering truth bombs and consequences. Clara would show up at the beach house about 2 hours after we got there, right when everyone was settled in and Adrian would be feeling comfortable and safe. The element of surprise was crucial. We needed that moment of shock, that instant where lies collided with reality in front of witnesses who couldn't be gaslit or manipulated later. What should I pack? Clara had joked during one of our texts, adding a laughing emoji that somehow still managed to convey deep emotional pain. Swimsuits or divorce papers? It was funny because it was tragic, and I'd responded with both. Never hurts to be prepared, because at this point, gallows humor was pretty much all we had. I'd also started noticing things about Lila that I'd probably been ignoring for weeks or maybe months. The way she'd gotten a new bikini, not the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, but a completely new one that she'd hidden in the back of her closet like it was classified information. The way she'd been doing extra workouts, coming home from the gym with that flush that suggested she'd been pushing herself harder than usual. The way she'd gotten her hair done 2 days before the trip, spending what I'm pretty sure was 3 hours and $200 at the salon for just a trim and some highlights. All of this would have been normal vacation preparation stuff, except for one tiny detail. She'd never done this level of preparation for our previous family trips. When we'd gone to visit her parents last summer, she'd packed the night before and worn her hair in a ponytail the entire week. When we'd done that cabin trip with my family, she'd barely bothered with makeup. But for this trip, the one where her ex-boyfriend would be present, she was suddenly putting an effort that suggested this wasn't just about looking good for family photos. I watched all of this happen with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying bizarre mating rituals. Every new detail just confirmed what I already knew. This vacation meant something different to her than it did to everyone else. While I was thinking about hammock naps and teaching the kids to fish, she was thinking about whatever fantasy scenario she'd constructed in her head involving Adrian and second chances and probably some Nicholas Sparks-level romantic nonsense. The kids, bless their oblivious little hearts, were just excited about the beach. They'd made lists of things they wanted to do: build sandcastles, find hermit crabs, stay up late for esmores, swim until they turned into prunes. They had no idea their mother had turned their vacation into the set of a reality TV show, or that their father had turned it into an elaborate revenge plot. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, and I envied them their simple excitement about boogie boards and ice cream. My in-laws were their usual brand of complicated. Lila's mom kept making pointed comments about keeping the family together and working through difficulties, which made me wonder if Lila had told her mother about Adrian coming and somehow spun it as a test of my commitment or some other twisted logic. My father-in-law just wanted to know if there'd be a grill and whether the cable would have sports channels, because his priorities were beautifully straightforward and entirely focused on food and football. 3 days before we left, Clara sent me a message that made me laugh so hard I had to pretend I was coughing when Lila asked what was so funny. I bought a new sundress for the occasion. Figure if I'm going to ruin my marriage and confront my cheating husband, I might as well look fantastic while doing it. Also picked up some killer sunglasses. Very woman-scorned, but make it fashion. I'd responded with a gif of someone eating popcorn, because that's what this felt like, the most entertaining disaster I'd ever been personally involved in. The night before we left, Lila came into the bedroom while I was pretending to read, but actually mentally rehearsing how the vacation confrontation would play out. "I'm really glad you're being so mature about Adrian coming," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "A lot of men would be insecure or jealous, but you're confident enough to handle it. That's one of the things I love about you." I looked up from my book and smiled, really smiled, because the irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I'm just looking forward to a memorable vacation," I told her, which was possibly the most honest thing I'd said in days. "I think this trip is going to be something nobody forgets." She leaned over and kissed me, completely misinterpreting my enthusiasm as support for her plan rather than anticipation for her plan's spectacular implosion. "It's going to be perfect," she said. "I can feel it." And you know what? She was right. It was going to be perfect, just not in any way she was imagining. Because while she was envisioning some weird triangle situation where everyone just peacefully coexisted and she got to relive her college romance, I was envisioning the moment when Clara walked through that beach house door and everything Lila had carefully constructed came crashing down like a sandcastle at high tide. The vacation was going to be legendary, unforgettable, and absolutely perfect. For me and Clara, at least. For Lila and Adrian? Not so much. But honestly, they'd earned whatever chaos was coming their way. Vacation day arrived with the kind of chaotic energy that only happens when you're trying to pack an entire household into vehicles that are definitely too small for the amount of stuff everyone insists they need. The kids were running around like caffeinated squirrels, arguing about who got to sit where in the van and whether we could stop for McDonald's on the way, even though we'd literally just eaten breakfast. My father-in-law had somehow packed enough snacks to survive a nuclear winter, dragging coolers and grocery bags like we were heading into the wilderness instead of a beach house that was 40 minutes away and had a fully stocked kitchen. My mother-in-law was stress organizing everything, rearranging suitcases in the trunk with the intensity of someone playing the world's most important game of Tetris. Lila was buzzing around with her checklist, literally holding a printed spreadsheet and checking things off with a highlighter like we were launching a space mission instead of going to the beach. Did everyone remember sunscreen? What about the beach toys? Where are the phone chargers? She was in her element, controlling every detail, making sure everything went according to her master plan. I just loaded bags and nodded, keeping my face in neutral mode while my brain was doing backflips thinking about what was coming in approximately 3 hours. The drive down was exactly what you'd expect from a family road trip. Kids asking, "Are we there yet?" before we'd even hit the highway. Someone needing a bathroom break 20 minutes in, my father-in-law falling asleep and snoring loud enough to wake the dead, and my mother-in-law providing running commentary on everyone else's driving like she was training for a career as a backseat driving instructor. Lila kept checking her phone, presumably texting Adrian updates about our arrival time, and I kept catching her smiling at her screen in a way that made my jaw clench, but my resolve strengthen. When we finally pulled up to the beach house, it was actually gorgeous. One of those classic coastal properties with weathered siding, a wraparound deck, and an ocean view that made you understand why people paid ridiculous amounts of money for vacation rentals. The kids exploded out of the van like they'd been released from prison, immediately running toward the beach access path, while screaming about waves and sandcastles. The in-laws started the slow process of unloading enough luggage to stock a small hotel, and Lila stood there taking it all in with this dreamy expression that would have been sweet if I didn't know she was mentally preparing for Adrian's arrival. We hauled everything inside, and I have to admit, the place was nice. Open floor plan, huge windows letting in natural light, a kitchen that made my father-in-law immediately start planning what he'd grill for dinner, bedrooms that were actually spacious enough that we wouldn't all be sleeping on top of each other. Under different circumstances, this would have been perfect. Under these circumstances, it was about to become the stage for the most dramatic confrontation of my entire life. Everyone scattered to claim bedrooms and unpack, and I was helping my mother-in-law figure out the coffee maker when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. My heart did this weird stuttering thing because I knew that sound meant Adrian had arrived, which meant Clara would be arriving soon after, which meant the show was about to begin. I glanced at my watch, right on schedule, because of course Adrian would be punctual for his romantic beach reunion fantasy. Lila practically sprinted to the front door, smoothing her hair and adjusting her new bikini top that was visible under her carefully selected cover-up. I followed at a more leisurely pace, mentally preparing myself to play the role of oblivious supportive husband one more time before everything went sideways. The kids came running back from the beach to see who'd arrived, and my in-laws emerged from their respective rooms with the kind of curiosity that suggested they were ready to judge this Adrian character 6 ways from Sunday. Adrian walked in like he owned the place, all confident smiles and beach casual outfit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He had that effortless thing going on that some guys just have, where they look like they stepped out of a catalog for expensive boat shoes and designer sunglasses. He was carrying some fancy craft beer as a house gift and a bag that I'm pretty sure was designer luggage, because of course it was. "Hey everyone," he announced, spreading his arms like he was greeting old friends instead of inserting himself into a family vacation where he extremely did not belong. Lila lit up like a Christmas tree, doing this weird excited greeting that involved a hug that lasted approximately 3 seconds too long to be appropriate. "Adrian," I'm so glad you made it. Everyone, this is Adrian, my friend from college. The way she emphasized friend was almost comical, like if she said it with enough conviction, it would make the situation less weird. It did not make the situation less weird. My father-in-law shook Adrian's hand with the grip of a man who was clearly sizing him up and finding him wanting. My mother-in-law did that thing where she smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. The universal signal for, I'm being polite, but I don't like this situation one bit. The kids just kind of stared at him, confused about why some random dude was joining our family vacation. I stepped forward and shook his hand, squeezing just a little harder than necessary. Adrian, great to finally meet you. Lila's told me so much about you. Every word was carefully calibrated to sound friendly while actually being the verbal equivalent of marking territory. He smiled back, but I could see the slight uncertainty in his eyes, like some part of his brain was registering that maybe this wasn't going to be as smooth as he'd imagined. Lila started giving Adrian the grand tour, showing him where he'd be sleeping. In a room suspiciously close to ours, I noticed, and pointing out all the amenities like she was a real estate agent trying to close a sale. I hung back with the kids, helping them sort through beach toys while keeping one ear on the conversation happening in the other room. Adrian was doing that thing guys do when they're trying to impress, talking about his CrossFit routine and his job in finance, and some recent vacation he'd taken to somewhere expensive and exotic. And then, right as Lila was proudly introducing Adrian to my in-laws in the living room, right as he was settling into the beach house with his craft beer and his designer luggage and his complete obliviousness to what was coming, I heard it. The sound I'd been waiting for. Another car pulling into the driveway. I checked my watch again. Perfect timing. Clara was nothing if not punctual, and she'd clearly taken my advice about dramatic entrances seriously. I could see Lila's face scrunch up in confusion through the window. We weren't expecting anyone else, at least not according to her plan. Adrian barely noticed, too busy explaining some boring work story to my father-in-law, who looked like he was contemplating taking a nap standing up. The car door slammed, and I positioned myself near the front door, ready to watch the most beautiful disaster unfold. The door creaked open slowly, and then she appeared. Clara, in all her scorned woman glory, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than Adrian's luggage, sunglasses that screamed, I'm about to ruin someone's whole existence, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and had zero regrets about it. She paused in the doorway, surveying the room like a general assessing a battlefield, and then she zeroed in on Adrian with laser precision. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass, sweet enough to cause cavities, and dangerous enough to make everyone in the room suddenly pay attention. Hi, honey, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sugar-coated venom that only a truly wronged woman can produce. Surprise, my overseas trip got canceled. The room went so silent you could hear a pin drop on carpet. Adrian's face went through about 17 different colors, settling somewhere between ghost white and seasick green. His beer bottle hung frozen halfway to his mouth, his entire body locked up like someone had hit a pause button on his existence. Lila's jaw literally dropped. I'm talking full cartoon character level of shock, mouth hanging open, eyes wide enough to see the whites all the way around. The kids, bless their innocent souls, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Who's that lady? My youngest tugged on my shirt, looking up at me with confused eyes, and I leaned down and whispered back with barely contained glee. That, my children, is Karma in sandals. And she is magnificent. My mother-in-law made a noise that sounded like a cross between a gasp and a laugh, clearly delighted that her instincts about this whole situation had been correct. My father-in-law perked up immediately, suddenly very interested in the proceedings, his beer forgotten as he settled in to watch what was clearly about to be the most entertaining thing to happen all year. Clara walked further into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown to detonation, and extended her hand to Lila with exaggerated politeness. You must be Lila. I've heard so much about you. I'm Clara, Adrian's wife. She said, wife, with enough emphasis to make it clear that this was a title she was currently very much holding on to for strategic purposes, even if emotionally she was already planning its termination. I stepped forward, playing my role perfectly. Clara, so glad you could make it. I told you, the more the merrier, right? I gestured around the room like this was completely normal, like I hadn't just orchestrated the most justified ambush in the history of beach vacations. Everyone, this is Clara. I invited her to join us since Adrian mentioned she'd be alone this week. Isn't that nice? The look Lila shot me could have melted steel, but I just smiled back innocently, channeling every ounce of, I have no idea why you're upset, energy I could muster. Adrian tried to stammer something that might have been an explanation or an excuse, but Clara cut him off with a look that could stop a charging bull. Yes, Clara said, still smiling that dangerous smile. Isn't it wonderful that your husband is so thoughtful? Making sure I wasn't left out while my husband attended his very important work conference. She turned to Adrian, tilting her head with exaggerated curiosity. How is that conference going, by the way, honey? The first night at the beach house was awkward enough to power a small city with the sheer uncomfortable energy radiating from every corner of the property. Adrian and Lila kept trying to act normal, which only made everything more obviously abnormal, like watching two people try to pretend a building isn't on fire while standing in the middle of the flames. Clara, on the other hand, was playing the long game with the patience of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot. She unpacked her bags in the guest room like she had all the time in the world, made polite small talk with my in-laws who were absolutely living for this drama, and generally acted like a woman who knew she held all the cards and was just waiting for the right moment to lay down a royal flush. I barely slept that night, partially from anticipation and partially because I could hear Lila pacing in our bedroom like a caged animal, trying to figure out how her perfect plan had gone so spectacularly wrong. She kept starting to say something, then stopping, then starting again, like her brain was short-circuiting, trying to find an explanation that didn't make her look like the villain in this situation. Spoiler alert, there wasn't one. Around 3 in the morning, she finally hissed, "Did you know Clara was coming?" And I just mumbled something about being a good host and rolled over, pretending to be too sleepy for conversation while internally doing victory laps. The next morning arrived with that aggressive cheerfulness that only beach weather can provide. Sunny, breezy, perfect conditions for what was shaping up to be an absolute soap opera of a day. The kids were already up and demanding pancakes. My father-in-law was claiming the best deck chair for his post-breakfast nap, and my mother-in-law was making coffee while providing running commentary on young people these days, in a tone that suggested she was thoroughly enjoying watching the younger generation implode. By noon, everyone had migrated to the pool area because apparently we couldn't just enjoy the perfectly good ocean 20 yards away. We had to use the fancy infinity pool that came with the rental. The kids were doing cannonballs and screaming at volumes that probably violated noise ordinances. My in-laws were set up under umbrellas with enough sunscreen to protect a small army, and the 4 of us, me, Lila, Adrian, and Clara, were arranged around the pool like chess pieces waiting for someone to make the first move. I was floating on an inflatable lounger with a piña colada that was definitely too strong for noon, but felt entirely appropriate given the circumstances, watching the show unfold from behind my sunglasses. Clara was stretched out on a lounge chair reading a book about divorce law, which I'm pretty sure she'd chosen specifically for the cover title to be visible, wearing a swimsuit that made it clear she'd been serious about that CrossFit routine. Adrian kept sneaking glances at her like a kid who'd been caught stealing cookies and was waiting for punishment, while also trying to sneak glances at Lila, which was honestly impressive levels of stupid even for him. Lila, to her credit or maybe her detriment, decided to try the frontal assault approach. She walked over to Clara's lounge chair with 2 glasses of lemonade like a peace offering, wearing her new bikini and what I'm sure she thought was a disarming smile. "Clara, I'm so glad you could join us. I hope there's no weirdness about Adrian being here. We're all adults, and he and I are just old friends catching up." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. My father-in-law lowered his newspaper. My mother-in-law stopped pretending to read her romance novel. Even the kids paused their screaming to sense that something important was happening. I took a long sip of my drink and settled in for the show. Clara looked up from her book, took off her sunglasses with deliberate slowness, and smiled at Lila with the kind of warmth that could give you frostbite. "Old friends. Right. That's so sweet." She accepted the lemonade, took a delicate sip, and then tilted her head with exaggerated curiosity. "So, Lila, how long have you 2 been married?" She gestured toward me with her glass, but her eyes never left Lila's face. 7 years, Lila answered, clearly not sure where this was going but smart enough to recognize a trap being set. 7 years, Clara repeated, nodding slowly like she was processing deeply important information. And Adrian and I have been married for 5 years. Though apparently, your husband thinks he's single again. Funny how that works, isn't it? Time just flying by while people forget they made vows in front of God and everyone they know. Adrian, who'd been pretending to check his phone by the shallow end, suddenly became very interested in the pool filter. Lila's smile faltered like a candle in strong wind. I'm sure that's just a misunderstanding, she said, her voice getting that tight quality that meant she was about to lose her composure. Adrian wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Clara interrupted, her voice still sweet, but with edges sharp enough to draw blood. Wouldn't lie about where he was going this week. Wouldn't tell me he had a mandatory work conference while actually planning a romantic beach getaway with his ex-girlfriend. Wouldn't send shirtless gym selfies at 2 in the morning to a married woman. She said all of this while maintaining perfect composure, like she was discussing the weather instead of detonating someone's entire existence. Everyone froze. And I mean everyone. My nephew literally stopped mid-cannonball, hanging in the air for what felt like an impossible moment before splashing down. My brother-in-law, who'd been in the pool doing laps, grabbed the edge and just stared. My mother-in-law made a noise that was part gasp, part delighted cackle, and my father-in-law muttered, "Jesus Christ," loud enough for everyone to hear. Clara wasn't done, though. She pulled out her phone with the casual confidence of someone who'd come prepared for war and started swiping through screenshots with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence. Would you like to see? Because I have everything. Timestamps, message threads, photos. She turned the phone toward Lila, who'd gone pale enough to blend in with the pool deck. This one's my personal favorite. Adrian asking if you still thought about that night in college. Very subtle, very appropriate for a married man to send to another married woman. Adrian finally found his voice, which unfortunately for him came out as a pathetic squeak. Clara, this isn't the time or place. Really? Clara turned to him, and even from my floaty in the pool, I could feel the temperature drop about 20 degrees. Because when was the time and place, Adrian? When you were lying to my face about a work conference? When you were buying new swim trunks and protein powder to get beach ready for your ex? When, exactly, should we have this conversation? Please, enlighten me, because I'm genuinely curious about when the appropriate time would be to discuss your affair. It's not an affair, Lila shouted, finally losing her careful composure. The kids all turned to stare at her, and she had the grace to look embarrassed, lowering her voice but not her intensity. We're just friends. We were just talking. Nothing physical happened. I couldn't help myself. I actually laughed out loud, which made everyone turn to look at me floating there on my ridiculous inflatable lounger with my ridiculous tropical drink. Oh, honey, I said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice even if I'd wanted to. The just friends defense. Classic. Really solid strategy there. Nothing says platonic friendship like inviting your ex to a family vacation, lying about his wife's location, and exchanging late-night messages about how much you miss each other. Lila's head whipped toward me so fast I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. You knew? This whole time you knew Clara was coming. I invited her, I said cheerfully, raising my glass in a little toast. Because unlike some people, I believe in honesty and transparency. Also, I thought it would be educational for the kids to see what consequences look like in real time. Consider it a life lesson about making good choices. My mother-in-law actually applauded. Like, literally brought her hands together and clapped while laughing. Oh, I like him, she said to nobody in particular. I've always liked him. This is fantastic. Adrian tried to approach Clara, hands up in what I guess was supposed to be a placating gesture, but really just made him look like he was surrendering, which honestly was probably accurate. Baby, let me explain. Clara held up one perfectly manicured hand. Don't. Just don't. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay at this beach house for the week you planned, and you're going to think really hard about your choices. And I'm going to stay here too, because your wife's husband was kind enough to invite me, and I'm going to enjoy this vacation. And then, when we get home, you're going to find divorce papers waiting for you. My boss already has them drafted. She gave me a discount because she found this situation exceptionally entertaining. She stood up then, gathered her book and her towel with perfect dignity, and walked toward the house. But she paused at the sliding door, turned back, and delivered one final blow. Oh, and Lila? Those gym selfies you were rating so highly? He sends those to at least 3 other women. I checked. So congratulations, you're not even special. You're just another ego boost for a middle-aged man having a crisis. The door slid shut behind her with a decisive click, and the silence that followed was absolutely golden. Adrian looked like someone had physically struck him. Lila was doing this thing where she was trying not to cry, but also trying to look defiant, which resulted in a facial expression that looked like she was having some kind of medical emergency. The kids were all staring with their mouths open, and my oldest whispered, "What's divorce papers?" in a voice that suggested therapy was definitely in our future. I paddled my floaty over to the pool edge and pulled myself out, water dripping everywhere, still holding my drink. Well, I announced to nobody in particular, this vacation is turning out way better than cable TV. Anyone want another drink? I'm thinking we make the next round even stronger. My father-in-law raised his empty beer can. Hell yes. And son. He looked directly at me. You're my favorite son-in-law now. Just wanted you to know that officially. Lila made a strangled noise and stormed off toward the house. Adrian stood there like a statue, probably trying to figure out if he could somehow fix this or if he should just pack his designer luggage and flee. The kids went back to playing, having already moved on because children are remarkably resilient to adult drama. And me? I made another round of drinks, settled into a lounge chair next to my father-in-law, and prepared for whatever chaos was coming next. Because if this was day 2 of 7, we were in for one hell of a vacation. By day 3, the beach house had essentially split into 2 very distinct factions, like we were reenacting the Civil War except instead of North versus South, it was Team Reality versus Team Denial. On Team Reality, we had me, Clara, my father-in-law who'd fully committed to Team Chaos, my mother-in-law who was enjoying this more than any vacation she'd been on in decades, and surprisingly, half. The kids who'd somehow picked up on the vibes and decided that Aunt Clara was cool and Uncle Adrian was weird. On Team Denial, we had Lila, Adrian, and Lila's mom who kept making these passive-aggressive comments about forgiveness and working through difficulties, like Adrian hadn't spent weeks planning a romantic beach rendezvous with a married woman while lying to his own wife. The battle lines had been drawn, and honestly, it was kind of beautiful in its own dysfunctional way. Meals had become these carefully choreographed events where half the table pretended everything was normal, while the other half made pointed comments disguised as innocent conversation. Breakfast that morning had been particularly spectacular when Clara asked Adrian to pass the orange juice and followed it up with, "Unless you're too busy texting other women to do simple tasks. I wouldn't want to interrupt your busy schedule." Adrian had turned a shade of red that I'm pretty sure isn't found in nature and mumbled something about needing to check his emails, fleeing the table like it was on fire. My father-in-law had snorted into his coffee, and my mother-in-law had given Clara an approving nod that suggested she was mentally drafting adoption papers. Even the kids laughed, though I'm not sure they fully understood why. They just knew that Aunt Clara was delivering some kind of sick burn, and those are always funny to children. Lila had tried to defend him, naturally, because at this point she was pot committed to this disaster and couldn't back out without admitting she'd made catastrophically bad choices. "He's under a lot of stress," she'd said, which was such a weak defense that even her own mother had raised an eyebrow. "We should all try to be more understanding and mature about this situation." I nearly choked on my scrambled eggs. Mature? You invited your ex-boyfriend on our family vacation, and I invited his wife. I'd say we're being incredibly mature about this. We could have had this conversation through lawyers instead of over pancakes. Count your blessings, honestly. That had pretty much set the tone for the day, and by the time we all migrated down to the beach in the afternoon, the tension was thick enough to spread on toast. The kids had immediately started building sandcastles with the kind of focused intensity that children bring to pointless activities, and I'd volunteered to help them because A, it was actually kind of relaxing, and B, it gave me front row seats to whatever drama was going to unfold. Clara had set up her towel and umbrella with strategic precision, positioning herself where she could see both Adrian and Lila at all times, while also maintaining maximum sun protection, because the woman was committed to both revenge and proper skincare. She brought a thriller novel about a woman who murders her cheating husband, and I'm 90% sure she'd chosen it specifically so Adrian would see the cover. It was working. He kept glancing over nervously like the book might come to life and attack him. Lila was doing that thing where she was trying too hard to look relaxed and carefree, which resulted in her looking like someone who'd consumed an unhealthy amount of caffeine and was fighting the urge to vibrate out of her skin. She'd attempted to engage Adrian in conversation multiple times, but he was clearly trying to maintain distance now that his wife was present and actively cataloging his every move. It was like watching someone try to flirt while also trying to pretend they weren't flirting, which is basically impossible and resulted in Adrian looking like he was having some kind of neurological episode. My youngest came running over, covered in sand, and holding a plastic shovel like it was Excalibur. "Dad, we need help with the tower. It keeps falling down." I dutifully followed him back to the sandcastle construction site, where my other kids and a couple of my nephews had created what looked like a sand-based architectural disaster. "The structural integrity is compromised," I announced in my most serious dad voice, crouching down to examine their work. "We need better foundation support and possibly a moat for defensive purposes." The kids all nodded like I was delivering crucial military intelligence, and we set to work reinforcing their castle. That's when Lila decided to make her move. She walked over to our construction site, standing there with her hands on her hips and that expression that suggested she was about to try to have a serious talk in front of the children, which was already a tactical error. "Can we talk?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but coming across more like someone about to serve me papers. "We are talking," I replied, not looking up from the mode I was digging. "See? Words are happening. This is the definition of talking." One of the kids giggled, which only made Lila's jaw tighten. "Privately," she hissed, glancing at the kids who were now all pretending to be very focused on their sandcastle, but were obviously listening to every word with the kind of attention they never gave to homework instructions. I stood up, brushed sand off my hands, and smiled. "Kids, keep working on that eastern wall. I'll be right back." I followed Lila a few yards away, though not far enough that our entire family couldn't still see us having what was clearly an argument disguised as a conversation. "You're humiliating me," she started, keeping her voice low but intense. "In front of my family, in front of Adrian, in front of everyone. How could you invite Clara here? How could you do this to us?" I actually laughed, which was apparently the wrong response based on how her face went from angry to furious. "How could I do this to us? Sweetheart, let me break this down for you in small words. You invited your ex-boyfriend to our family vacation. You lied about his wife's location. You've been having inappropriate conversations with him for weeks. I found the messages, Lila. I saw the gym selfies. I saw the remember when texts at 2 in the morning. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly guilty about bringing Clara into this situation." "Those messages were harmless," she protested, but her voice had that quality that suggested even she didn't fully believe it. "We were just reminiscing. Friends do that. Friends don't invite each other on family vacations while lying to their spouses," I countered. "Friends don't rate each other's abs in text messages. Friends don't make plans to share a beach house for a week while pretending it's all innocent. You want to know what friends do? They have lunch occasionally. They maybe exchange Christmas cards. They don't do whatever this disaster is." She was gearing up for another defense when Clara walked by, timing it perfectly like she'd been waiting for her cue. She didn't even stop, just called out as she passed, "Hey, don't let me interrupt your crisis management session. I'm just heading to grab drinks. Anyone want anything? Oh wait, I should probably ask Adrian what he wants. He's so particular about his beverages. Remember that time he told me he was allergic to pineapple, and then I found out he'd been ordering piña coladas at bars with his coworkers? Good times." My father-in-law, who'd been dozing in his beach chair, woke up long enough to shout, "I'll take a beer," then immediately went back to napping with a satisfied smile on his face. My mother-in-law whispered something to one of the other adults that made them both laugh, while looking directly at Lila and Adrian. Lila's face had progressed through several shades of red and was approaching purple. "This is ridiculous. You're turning our vacation into a circus." "I'm turning it into a circus?" I gestured around at the beach, the family, the situation. "You brought the ex-boyfriend. You supplied the lies. You created this mess. I just provided the consequences. There's a difference." I turned to head back to the kids and their sandcastle, then paused and looked back at her. "Oh, and for the record, I upgraded the guest list. Clara's way more fun than Adrian anyway. She's got better stories, she's not constantly checking herself out in reflective surfaces, and she actually tips the pizza delivery guy properly. So really, I did us all a favor. I walked back to my kids, who'd constructed what appeared to be a sand cathedral during my brief absence. Looking good, team, I told them, settling back into construction mode. Now let's build a wall around this thing. A big, strong wall that nothing can penetrate. Like boundaries. You kids know what boundaries are. When you tell someone to stop doing something and they have to listen, my oldest asked, carefully patting down a tower. Exactly right. Boundaries are very important. Remember that for when you're older and people try to invite their exes on your vacations. I glanced back at Lila, who was standing there looking lost and furious and confused all at once. Dinner that evening was another masterclass in awkward family dynamics. We decided on a big cookout, and my father-in-law was manning the grill like a champion, flipping burgers and hot dogs while providing running commentary on young people's poor life choices. Clara had somehow ended up helping my mother-in-law make potato salad, and I could hear them bonding over recipes and terrible husband stories. Adrian was sitting alone on the deck pretending to be very interested in his phone, probably Googling how to survive when your affair gets exposed at a beach house. As we all sat down to eat at the big outdoor table, Clara casually mentioned Adrian's late-night gym selfies. The conversation had been relatively normal up until that point. Kids talking about their sandcastles, my father-in-law complaining about the price of beef, standard dinner stuff. Then Clara just dropped it into conversation like a hand grenade at a picnic. So Adrian, do you still do those midnight gym sessions? You know, the ones where you take shirtless progress pics. She said it with such sweet innocence that for a second everyone thought maybe it was a genuine question. Then the implications hit. Adrian dropped his burger. Lila kicked someone under the table, probably aiming for me, but hitting my brother-in-law based on his yelp. My father-in-law laughed so hard he started coughing. The kids all looked confused but interested, sensing adult drama the way sharks sense blood in water. I couldn't resist. I took a bite of my burger, chewed thoughtfully, and said with perfect deadpan delivery, "You know, I tried the shirtless fridge selfie routine once." Lila said it made me look like I was auditioning for a documentary about dad bods. Apparently there's a market for that, but it's not the market Adrian's going for. Even some of Team Denial laughed at that one. Clara raised her drink in my direction like a toast. At least you're honest about your dad bod. That's refreshing. Unlike some people who think they're still 25 when they're pushing 40 with a receding hairline and a CrossFit membership they use to pick up women. Adrian stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "I'm going for a walk," he announced to nobody in particular, and stomped off toward the beach like a child having a tantrum. Lila's mother tried to salvage something, anything, from this disaster. Perhaps we should all practice more forgiveness and compassion. But she was drowned out by my father-in-law asking who wanted another burger and my kids arguing about whether they could have s'mores for dessert even though they hadn't finished their vegetables. Best vacation ever. The bonfire night was when everything finally exploded into full-blown chaos. We'd gathered around the fire pit on the beach, marshmallows ready, kids excited for s'mores, and the adults nursing drinks strong enough to handle whatever drama was brewing. Adrian, in what can only be described as a catastrophically bad decision, decided to pull out a guitar. Nobody asked him to. Nobody wanted him to. But there he was, strumming away like he was auditioning for some romantic movie montage, singing love songs with way too much passion and eye contact directed at Lila. Clara let him get through exactly half of the first verse before she'd had enough. She stood up, walked over, and snatched the guitar right out of his hands mid-chorus with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this move for hours. "Save it for your girlfriend," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Oh wait, you have several of those. Maybe you should make a playlist." That's when Lila completely lost it, screaming at me across the bonfire like I was personally responsible for ruining her life. "How dare you do this to us?" After the vacation disaster ended, and we all returned to regular life, things unraveled faster than a cheap beach umbrella in a hurricane. Clara filed for divorce within a week, her boss apparently giving her the friends and family discount because she found the whole situation professionally entertaining. Adrian moved into one of those sad bachelor apartments that smell like regret and microwave dinners, the kind of place with beige walls and a single folding chair as furniture. Lila tried damage control, showing up with apologies, expensive gifts, and even wearing that bikini I'd bought her years ago like it would somehow rewind time. Too late. Way too late. I told her straight up, You used our family vacation as some kind of loyalty test for your emotional affair. You failed spectacularly. And honestly, the bikini doesn't fit the betrayal anymore. She went nuclear on social media after that, posting vague quotes about controlling men and toxic relationships, painting herself as the victim in a situation she'd orchestrated. Clara, absolute legend that she is, commented on one of the posts. Controlling? Honey, you invited your ex to a family trip. Sit down. Months later, that vacation had achieved legendary status in family folklore. My uncle literally called it the vacation from heaven, for everyone except Lila and Adrian. Every family gathering included someone bringing it up, embellishing details, acting out their favorite moments like it was dinner theater. My father-in-law still laughed about Clara snatching that guitar mid-song whenever he'd had a few beers. Lila moved back with her parents, still posting sad quotes about surviving toxic men on Instagram like she hadn't been the architect of her own destruction. Adrian lost half his savings to Clara in the divorce, and she celebrated by buying herself a convertible. Clara and I stayed friends, actually. She sends me revenge memes every Sunday morning, and we get coffee occasionally to laugh about the whole disaster. As for me, I took another vacation, this time solo. No exes, no drama, no family chaos. Just peace, good books, and ocean views. I met someone new there, a woman named Ivy who laughed so hard when I told her the beach house story that she nearly spit out her wine. We're taking things slow, but honestly, after everything, slow feels perfect.